Alrighty, welcome folks to our what is it? This is our fifth one, our fifth author interview with Talabi, and we're going to be talking about convergence problems. Um, but I'm just gonna do a quick little interview of myself, and then the man of the honor, as we you all may have just missed, I'm just congratulating them on all the awards that they're getting nominated for, and everybody reading all their stories. So basically, they're famous, and we all want to be just like them when we grow up. But yeah, really quickly, my name is Christian. I do social media art direction at Violet Mag, and I'm my guest edit issue 28, themed on belonging, and I do a couple of the author interviews, newsletters, et cetera, et cetera. And here you go. Hand it over to yourself.
All right. So yeah, thanks, Christian. And it is awesome to be reconnected with Fiyah somehow, because I had a story in Fiyah years ago. I should probably make an appearance again, but this works, right? Doing an interview with Fiyah, that works as well. So my name is Wole Talabi. I am an engineer, writer, editor from Nigeria. My pronouns are he, him, or they, them. That works too. And I have, written a bunch of speculative fiction stories, mostly science fiction, some fantasy. My first novel is a fantasy novel called Shigidi and the Brass Head of Abalifon, which Christian was just congratulating me on because it got nominated for a few awards, which is nice. It's always nice to know people are reading your stuff. And yeah, it's awesome to be here talking with you about my latest book, Convergence Problems.
Yeah, I think that's like what you had like touched on a little bit at the beginning is the reason I wanted to do these author interviews is kind of to show this like I don't know if it's like connecting the dots or like but it's like all these different folks that are like have this connectivity with Fiyah and just sort of mapping it out and like okay their stories appear here and then they also appear other places and then this is like the other direction that they take. I think just to show that it's a diversity of like black writers accomplishing things in like a multitude of ways. It's not just like us the same path or like a 1-2 step that we all can take. And so I just was thinking in what ways could we sort of like I don't know expand upon that outside of like your story got published in Fiyah and it's like it's been read or something of that sort. And so I think this way is like when folks become more established or on a rise to establishment, it's like what is that sort of kind of like conversation or kind of like that moment there, and what could that look like conversing with those who are coming up and also into the future when you like invite you back to be like, hey, I'm this like literary icon slash et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, I'm glad that's like something you mentioned, like you picked up on because it was like I was really trying to come up with ways to um just also connect the magazine outside of just like that one moment because I feel like Fiyah has been like this hub for all these black writers kind of all over and to be able to get their footing and grounding and also build like kinship with folks through like the digital space as well. So yay.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah, you and you, Fiyah.
Yeah. You never know sometimes when you think it's gonna work or you think you're trying so hard and then like someone's like, yeah, I see what you're doing. You're like, wait a minute. It might be all worth it. Okay, cool. So basically, I move into the question I asked you in the DMs is what's your favorite from the collection?
Right. I guess this is always a tricky question, right? When someone asks you what's your favorite story from of yours or something, even from this collection. But I think for this one, there is a fairly straightforward-ish answer because the collection mostly exists because of this story. And that is the central novella in the story, in the collection called Ganger. Ganger as in doppelganger, but cut short. And essentially it is the central story around the collection, around which the collection was built. And it also mostly captures a lot of the core themes that are reflected in other stories in the collection. So yeah, I would say that's probably my favorite.
Okay,
If you
beautiful.
forced me to pick one.
Yeah, I mean, I make all the authors do it, and like if it's just a single story, I make them pick a favorite character, and like talk about it because it's like it's interesting to see what the author likes or what the readers have told the author they like or things like that, or how does after it comes out that shapes the relationship to the writer to the text now. You may have loved this one when he was like it was getting ready and editing and stuff like that. But now that it's in the world, it can change because of the way that people are engaging with certain parts of the text, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, I just think that's a very interesting question of like we spend so much time of it alone. We do that very intense editor situation, and then like it's out there. So like what's and so I'm always like, I don't know. I was always curious about that with folks. It's like, what do you, how do you feel about it now that it's out, and like what resonates with you? And that's almost a two for one because that's kind of like what after if I'm gonna actually read like a small excerpt, but like before that, it's like it was like why this short story, and so I think to see that it kind of I mean this novella, and I think to see why this like it centers the collection. I think as I was gonna ask you, did it start like that? Did you have this story and you built around it, or did the story come about and it just like completely shifted where you were going or what was happening?
Um, so for me, the story, it's been the core idea for the story was actually given to me by a friend as a birthday present, which is, friends that send you story ideas as birthday presents are great friends. And he sent it to me. My friend, he lives in the US now, Bankole. He sent me just on my birthday an email. He just said, my present to you is a story idea. It's this character set in a world where this happens, that happens, things go wrong, problems ensue. You can write the story. And I loved the idea that he sent me, but I didn't really know what I wanted to do with it yet. So I kind of sat on the idea. And he sent me this, I think, in 2015 or so. And I didn't write Ganger until 2022. Late 2022, early 2023, when I reconnected. I remembered an old legend of a hunter in Yoruba tradition. He's supposed to be the hunter that founded part of Lagos City, which is famous city in Nigeria now. But there was this legend about how he was a great hunter, even up until he was over 100, but eventually could no longer hunt, and then he felt so sad about this. He tried to find a way to continue and then found magic that could help him transform into an animal. In the original legend, it's a boa constrictor. I changed that in my retelling of it. But it was reading that and then realizing the thematic parallels between that legend and this story idea my friend had sent, which was about a girl living in a future where everything is done for you by robots, everything is automated, and she's trying to find a sense of purpose in life. And seeing the thematic parallels between this old legend and this futuristic, sort of dystopian story, it just clicked in my head that I can actually layer these two stories on top of each other in superposition and generate something new and interesting. So I just started writing. I was retelling this myth of the hunter while writing the story of this girl in this world where everything is done by machines. And as I was doing it, I was asking myself questions like, why is everything in this world automated? How did they get here? And I was building the world out as I was asking myself the question. So I had no idea how long it was going to be. I had no clue where I was going with it. I was just writing, but it's one of those, most of the time my stories, I think about them a lot and I have a good idea where they're going before I start writing. With this one, I didn't. It was essentially the story was kind of spilling out of me. And I wrote it fairly quickly. It just kept going and going and going until I got to a point and I was like, yes, this is how it ends. Because Lide the main character figures out her purpose. And that was the whole point of the story. So once I figured that out, then I knew where it was landing, and it ended up being, well over 25,000 words. So at that point, I knew it was a novella.
Ah, okay. That makes sense. That's like you gave me like 3 for 1 with that. Because I was also thinking I was gonna ask that too. Like what made you start with the mythos and then also layer it with the but then it didn't make sense how they came together, so you wrote with them together. Was it kind of like you wrote the mythos out first, or you kind of like wrote both out like boom boom boom?
No, because I knew the legend from when I was a child.
Mhm.
So I essentially knew how that ended, and I knew I wanted Lydie, the main character's story, to mirror that ending, but with a bit of a twist. Um, so I knew how to break the story, how to break that legend into sections that would mirror different aspects of Lydie's character development.
Mhm.
So I was writing the block as an kind of an introduction, the block of the legend as an introduction, and then I would write Lydie's story. And the more I figured out about Lydie's story, the more I would decide where I was going to break the legend as well, in order to
Mhm.
explain or kind of set up what was coming next with her story. And just having those two talk to each other as the story goes on. That was something I figured out as I was going along. So yeah,
Hmm.
I wrote the two of them together. I didn't really like write one, write the other, and then kind of mix. No, I
Yeah.
just the way you read it is the way I wrote it.
It's very interesting. I thought it worked really well. I even feel like it could work for like short stories too, because the mythos provides this sort of like background context, like gives
Yeah.
you all these questions, and then you start out with, basically suicide, which is like who doesn't love that? It's like let's go ahead and turn it up, right? And I no, I really do appreciate when folks kind of go there because I feel like sometimes I think it's like the science fiction or the technology or the magic is supposed to absolve the sort of like dread that's from like you living in a world or having to exist or be in relations or again having figure out your being, your ontology, like these, and I like the fact that your technology doesn't necessarily like absolves or make it easier for the character to be and that sort of belongings question there. And it's like, and it could be, oh, you're just not old enough yet. You just don't really realize what the hell is really outside. And it's like it's so funny because it's like something like I had some like elder folks would be like, you gotta let them go out there and do it. You gotta let the kid fall and bump their head so they can know not to do it. And you have other folks like, no, they can't go out there. They're not ready yet. We gotta like, shelter over till they get ready. And I kind of like that, the character was just like, I don't know, I'm kind of hard headed. I'm gonna find out, And I feel like I think people are more hard headed than they realize, and I think that's what I feel like sometimes a good protagonist really does is like not always in the same way, but they just like I'm gonna actually try this out a couple of times to make sure I learn my lesson. Because like in reality, some things we do learn right away. We're like, you know what, I'm never doing that again. Whew, changed my life. But
Yeah.
sometimes it's like I got to do it a couple more times just to make sure. And I felt that made to me in this like short amount of time, especially at the beginning, that felt the character felt really real. It wasn't just drama for the sake of drama. And I thought that
Yeah.
was like pretty interesting how you did that. So bravo.
Thank you. Thank you. And I feel like, yeah, like you said, that is how a lot of people in real life are. We are driven by certain desires, certain core things in our being that we want something to be a certain way, and we will keep trying. No
Hmm.
matter how many times we hear no, no matter how difficult or dangerous it is, we will keep trying for it. And it would have felt unrealistic to me for to have a main character, especially a Nigerian character. Nigerians are known for being stubborn. Like we're stubborn people. So it would have been weird to have a main character that just kind of gave up at the first sign of difficulty or adversity.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And I like how dramatic she is. It was like I'm gonna give it all. And I I was just like, it made me wonder, like, also again how bad the outside was. I thought that was really good way to set that up too. Like this person, whether they're ignorant or not, just rather not live in this utopia. And before they actually find out, a couple more chapters now, like what's going on. I really felt like it what that kind of trickled in like at a good pace too. And I was like, was it like so you when you saying you were just kind of like writing it out, was it like do you have like a sense of like, okay, this part feels done? Or is it more like when you go back and edit, you're like, okay, I cut this is a section and then this is a section.
Um, as I remember it, most of the time I had a fairly good sense of which parts were done, right? When I got to a certain emotional beat, I kind of knew, okay, here is where there should be a break. Some of that changed a little bit in editing, mostly like one or two paragraphs, but mostly to do with her parents, because it's
Mm,
mostly in Laide's narrative, but there is a section, or there's two sections where it's kind of from her parents' perspective. And I needed to find a good way to bring that in without, breaking the flow. So that's the part that got changed around a bit in editing, but the main character narrative, not so much. And I think also part of what helped in framing the novella for me was also just familiarity with a lot of real world parallels. For example, I don't know if you've heard of the mouse utopia experiment, um,
good
which
man.
was this which was this experiment where they put a bunch of mice in an enclosed space and provided them with everything they needed: food, water, you know, female mice and male mice together so everybody can have sex or whatever, they can reproduce. There was
Hmm.
basically nothing that they lacked. And it turned out to be a disaster. They hated it. The mice were dying, they were having diseases. It was surprising, right? People were surprised by the fact that, oh, but we gave the mice everything they needed. And in my head, it was just like, yeah, you gave them everything they needed except freedom.
Hmm.
And they could sense it. And to me, that came across as a really, really human thing, because in every society, as long as that society is built on some idea of someone controlling everyone else, there will always be dissent and unhappiness, no matter what the structure, utopia, what that looks like. And Lida is just kind of like a representation of that. She is that person that, like, yes, everything is done for me, everything is automated, but I can tell that I am not free and I want to get outside somehow. And she's desperate for that. So, yeah, all of that kind of informed my idea of writing the character and in how her story would play out.
Yeah, I like what you're saying with that as well. Is like it's complicating belonging. It's complicating kinship. You know, you can care and want to be around folks, but it may be disruptive. It may not be smooth. And then what happens? Is it chaos or community? Do you throw the person away or do you work through it? And I feel like I like that sort of like tension happening with the society and with her pair, her inner life like that as well. And also her experiencing new relationships and finding new people to have those like tensions and struggles with as well too. It was very like it was like she felt young, but she didn't feel super young, which I liked as well. It didn't feel YA, I guess is what I'm saying. But it was like she still felt like she was figuring herself out, not necessarily like just like, oh, I'm just super young and I don't know what I'm doing. And I think that made it worked really well. It worked because I was like, it was just like she's pushing, and I feel like she was really pushing through, and it felt like we was pushing through with her. And so yeah, I think that was like super bravo. Okay, I'm gonna ask one more question before we do like a slight excerpt from it, a reading. Since this one is like, I feel like it's kind of like hard, but I feel like it also has like some fantasy elements to it. So I'm gonna call it science fantasy. And I feel like some of the things that like was giving or that gave like fantasy to me early on was when she was thinking the thoughts together, and then you incorporated how that's how it works with the the android, but it also kind of was like it was science, but it also was kind of like a fantasy, sort of like you're taking your mind controlling the sentient being with like not magic but almost magic kind of. And so I really liked how you it was like again it was I felt like it was very harder, like on the harder side from like some of the terminology I think and some of the ways you built up the how the technology operates in this universe or this ecosystem that you set here. But I do feel like it was like I don't know, like some fantasy stuff happening in a way that I thought was very interesting. I was like, that was really one of the things that really kind of caught my eye. And I know you were saying the first novel is fantasy and like you're engineer and stuff like that. But I wonder, like, again, like what made you or how does that work sometimes with like, because I know some in genre places they want you to usually lean in more harder to one side or to not, or one of the genres or not, particularly. But I felt like even though this is still has a harder sci-fi, it still has a strong fantasy element to it as well. And like, what did you? I don't know, maybe has any like comment or context about that.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I'd call it a fancy element, but I know what you mean. In that part of the story where she is essentially manipulating her thoughts and using that to kind of evade the system and later on to even control parts of the system. To me, it kind of it picks up on something I've always really found interesting, and I kind of get to in several parts of the story, in several parts of Ganga, and that is our relationship between our mind and our body, right? Because the mind feels like this very intangible thing that just kind of exists in the ether, and our body is very real and grounded and physical, and you can touch it, right? But if someone asks you, where is your consciousness? What is your mind? Like, you can't point to any specific place. And but the mind has a lot of control over the body, right? There are people that can train themselves to endure extreme amounts of pain. People are capable of extreme feats of imagination. The placebo effect is well known, well documented. Just simply believing in something can make your body respond and make it essentially construct a physical reality. And I've studied a bit of cognition science, and the one thing I've realized is we know very little about how our own brains work. So I was kind of leveraging that to say, okay, if um, if Lide, this main character, is living in a world where a lot of machines are built using architecture that's copied from the human brain, and their own minds are under some kind of surveillance due to nanomachines in their minds that are attached to their brains and trying to read neural patterns. There's a lot of gap and there's a lot of knowledge gap in our understanding of how that works. And so what she's doing is she's essentially exploiting that. She knows that this algorithmic system that's surveilling all of them is built on a kind of logical base, right? It tries to understand what you're doing based on a series of logic. But by doing something almost illogical, like trying to think of two thoughts at the same time, you can essentially fool the system, or essentially using your imagination so powerfully that the system in your brain cannot tell the difference between reality and between what you're imagining and what you're physically experiencing. So it's based on actual real science, I would say, but it's based on the parts of the science that we don't fully understand. And I'm essentially just using that as an exploit, almost like a hack into the system. In a way, it also gets at a lot of what many traditional African societies have always known, right? And they've always said, which is the mind is the most powerful aspect of our humanity. It is our gateway into the world. It's the way we understand everything. It's the way we process everything. And the more you understand about yourself and your own mind, the more you can control. So I wanted to reflect that in the narrative, in her way of thinking about who she is. And you can kind of see how, I don't want to give away too much, but by the end of the story, she actually changes form. Let's just put it that way. She changes form, changes embodiment into a different person as she's changing her idea of who she is and what her purpose is. And all of that is just coming back to the mind is the most powerful part, and having a sense of purpose and understanding of who you are can supersede any technology.
Yeah. And I think maybe that's like why I feel like it felt fantasy. It felt like it was like learning a power system or learning your powers or figuring out how you can navigate the specific world. But yeah, I thought that was great. I
Yeah.
was like, I'm working on something like that with like kind of like the internet, like the net and something like that. And I thought about like telepathy in no way to sort of convey or use that as like the metaphor to work with that. But I also thought what you were doing was pretty interesting as well too. It's just like it's just different ways to sort of, I think, like you said, it's the unknown and what we do know, and then what's like common knowledge and what can we get away with within the lines of the narrative and stuff like that. So, and I
One,
know,
one, one, one more thing I wanted to add. Sorry, it was just
no, yeah.
I
This is your interview.
I pers- I mean, I'm an engineer, so I can be as hard science fiction as needed. Like I love research, I love technicality. You can see it in my writing and in my work. But I do find the almost Western concept of separating natural philosophy from the rest of philosophy in general, right? Natural philosophy is what becomes science, right?
Mhm.
Um, Separating the two, I find it to be a very flawed way of thinking about the world. And you will find in many non-Western societies, they never did this. Like philosophy is everything. You have science, technology, culture, religion, all embedded together into
Mhm.
some kind of cultural practice, and they never separate out the two. And it is very much a Western, Enlightenment period kind of concept to say, no, let's separate these two things and treat them as if they can never overlap. But in the average human being doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
In the same person that goes to church every day and prays to a God that they've never seen and has no physical evidence for, could also be, using the most high-tech um, car or phone or whatever is
Mhm.
available. And they're in their mind, there's no separation between these two. They're just as real
Yep.
in the mind of this person. The hard technology they can touch and the God or the spirits that they've never seen. So humanity is always, the way we understand the world is always embedded. And I try to reflect that in my writing a lot. Even when I write, I would still call it hard science fiction, but I would still reflect that lived reality of people, that there is no clean separation, right? There is no purely
Yeah.
logic human versus illogic human. We're the same human on top of each other.
Yeah. I agree. And I think that's part of I think I was hitting that before, like you're contending with what it means to be in civil society. And like this person is quote unquote ungovernable. And so how do the people close to you and then those, far react to that? And so yeah, that's on a metaphysical level. So then we interrogating our ontological, like how is our being in our structural and also how you truly feel. And so yeah, I agree with that. I think that's very interesting too, like having that the thought and that be the also like a vehicle as well as like a sort of technical for the character. Like the character is actually like doing it, but it's also a vehicle for the reader through how the character is evolving. Again, more bravo. It was yeah, I thought it was really great. And I like that whole also as well kind of like utopia dystopia a little bit. I really do like those because I feel like everyone like we're still sort of in the main society is like let's push towards a way that I don't know that is a sort of utopia. But then we know that like there's gonna be a dystopian side to that. But it's like I feel like a lot of folks are, or not a lot, but maybe some are trying to say, hey, before we get to this, whatever this dystopia or however we're reacting to the various different crises that are happening, can we pay attention to these things so these things don't escalate as the crises kind of continue? And I feel like these types of your story and stories like these like really still interrogate that, but don't necessarily lean in or fall into the dystopia trope from like the 2000 YA, which are still good and have its place. But I feel like it only works it really doesn't. I don't know. I can be biased because I don't know, whatever. But sometimes it doesn't really work until they make the movie and then they make a character black or non-white, and then you can sort of see the 3D of it. But usually, sometimes in the story, the characters are all usually white, and this just kind of fly by. And I just feel like in your dystopia, it's like even if it is like even homo race or like everyone's a migrant or of some migrant status, like in or categorized in a certain way that's like totalizing or like dictating, or dictating ontology, the material reality, like how they learn things and how they process knowledge. I thought that was like an interesting way to compare that to human. And then like in that structure, and so you already have, we already have whatever thoughts about immigration, migration, and stuff like that as well. And I also really like these conversations that expand the quote unquote black question or the Negro question or what black issues are. So a lot of folks, when I was organizing at that time, they was just like didn't consider migrant or immigration like a black issue. And so it's like, okay, we got to get beyond these sort of like we got to get beyond where we at. And so I've always just like appreciate ways that these in which they can come into play more, because like how are we like widening these questions, how do we all have these identities and experiencing these violences like in different geopolitical locations. And so what is the connection between those violences that are happening, and as we move and like I don't want to say crisscross or jump through different areas. How is that also reflective of that? And so, yeah, I feel like you really tackle some of these questions around like society and like what does it mean to be the odd person out in that society, and also in terms of like even in a structure society, there's still going to be like some othering, and I find that sobering a bit. You're not like, well, if we just wait 200, 2,000 years, we're all going to be happy on the internet and like whatever. And you're like, well, actually, we may not still figure it out. It may still be, or that just may be the case of humanity, or maybe where you're raising the stakes of like what's possible. For this makes me think like, okay, it's not, we just only can't just rely on technology to advance quote unquote human. It has to be more sort of engagement in that, which a lot of people I feel like will push otherwise. They would say, just get a child this iPhone and they'll be okay. And it's like, now they can't, they don't know how to close read no more. And it's like, or, they don't know context clues. And it's like, everything has to be a video. So, we're changing and adapting and stuff like that.
Yeah,
And I think
and
being is sort of really pushing that sort of like conversation too. So,
yeah, and you've actually hit on one of the key points I wanted to make with the novella, which is that idea that many people have that, the future or technology or time will resolve human problems,
yeah.
or stop us from, following our worst instincts and our worst behaviors. But actually, I don't believe so at all. And that's what I kind of get at in the story, is that this utopia that's actually a dystopia in some points of view is constructed by a Black woman who thinks she's doing the right thing,
Hmm.
but still has fundamentally the wrong philosophy about how humans work and what makes humans work. She's still categorizing people. She's still thinking almost in a kind of eugenicist way. And she's this Black tech billionaire. And that just, again, goes to show that reliance on technology and some wise one person, great leader that will show up and help us fix all our problems, I believe is fundamentally flawed. And at the end of the day, the only thing that will really work is community,
Yeah.
actual, honest community. And I get at that in multiple parts of the novella as well.
Yeah, I think it works really well. I really like interracial like relationships because it's like it gets like we all say that being black is not a homogenous, it's not the same thing. We're all not the same. And then it's like it still gets expected to be the same. So I'm like, you can never have to me enough stories about the ways in which that we have to improvise with each other and also with society. That's metaphysics. Like we're literally speculative, like how we're like out of all the way the world is, like we're still like living or coming to live in a certain kind of way, or creating these pockets of joy, either if they do abstraction or ejection or just like trying to like come into play. And it's just like I think that sort of like lineage and conversation and across the like sort of diaspora has been like very interesting. It's like who would have thought, we had a phenomenon that changed the world. And it could have still been a certain kind of way. This might not even be possible at a in one timeline or outcome, allegedly. So it's just I think it's very interesting sort of to explore like how where we come from and like how history also has this sort of cycle of going back, and then how again like this sort of like futurism sort of has this fascism sort of like, well, I guess if you look at history, the Italians, I guess, is going to be that way. But yeah, in that sense, like these sort of like reliance on technologies usually end up being a sort of like eugenic, like fascist sort of society. And it's like you say that without saying fat, because like that fascism is like, oh, it's like, God, we got. You said it's like, wow, like it's like, oh, please, like stop it. You know what I mean? It's just I don't know. Sometimes I feel like certain words have buzz to them, and all of a sudden everyone gets real tense, and this is like people are dying. Okay, and you're like you can't even like deal with this word, which is like it's not brand new. We didn't just make this up. It's already been put out there. It's already got proof and examples and definitions. But yeah, people refer to other buzzwords over not. I think that's sometimes it's like I really think about I think it's Baldwin, the James Baldwin quote is like the role of the artist is like the lover. I gotta make you see what you don't want to see. And I think that involves like actively sort of like almost like, betraying yourself and betraying that person. You're like, you have to, because society's judging you, you're judging yourself, the people's judging you. And so you have to like, to get to that point, you have to like, I think make this sort of betrayal of like the stakes of the logics here. And I think that's sort of, I feel like what you were getting at with this, like this, I keep thinking about this two thought, and it was like kind of like I said, like spiritual, magical, but also like mental. It was really kind of like illogical in a sense like that. I felt like sometimes it was just like, can you really focus and operate like this? But like if you practice, probably yeah, you know what I mean? It just was really playing in my mind. And so I feel like you was really dealing with this sort of what it alluded to as a way of sort of bringing forth the sort of double consciousness sort of thing like that. It's like I have to like be both people, or if we do both in terms of binary, I have to exist both at the same time. And that's like me in like interrogation of improvising. Like we're improvising on this racial basis to like to exist. How are people going to understand this? How are we going to navigate the violence that's like portrayed towards us? Um, yeah. Again, it's all great. That's all I'm saying. I'm just going more just to say that.
All right.
And it's just like I just find it super fascinating too, because like I said, I feel like I'm saying it is hard, but like I said, it does to me still have some of those things that I think I would relate to fantasy, which I didn't necessarily expect. I expect it to be a little bit more like I don't know. It just to feel maybe a little bit more. No, I don't know. It's just like also maybe because I think this is more I think I've only read like one of your stories before, so I think this is more the most I've read of your work more recently now, and so I think that's just it too, just like getting your style and just and your pace and stuff. Okay, can you do us the honors of reading the excerpt?
I can. All right. So I'll read the first part of Ganga, just about 3 pages, so it doesn't take too long. So if anyone listens to this and they're curious, they can go pick up the book and finish the story.
I'll bring out the video. But yeah, if you see all the other videos, we do it like spoiler, so just enough for people to still go. That's why I haven't really kind of got like super specific, because I don't want to give nothing juicy away. But yeah.
Okay. All right. Ganga. 1. Infimum. Among the Yoruba people, it is said that Olofin Ogunfunmire of Awori, the famous hunter who gave up his place of honor in the palace of Oduduwa at Ile-Ife for little more than the opportunity to seek out new hunting grounds, eventually lived to such an advanced age that his body could no longer keep up with his skill and desire. His bones ached, his muscles sagged, his eyes dulled, and his hands trembled whenever he took aim. He became too weak to carry his own weapons, too easily disoriented to navigate his way through new forest paths, too slow to stalk and chase down sprightly deer and palm civets and wildfowl and boars. So at last, one day, when he attempted to rise at cockcrow and felt the full betrayal of his own body, the final moment of realization settled upon him. The once spirited man was overcome with sorrow, for life had held no greater pleasure for him than the thrill of the hunt. He hid himself away in his hut near a small hill in Ido, refusing visitors, gifts, food, the pleadings of his own children, declining to participate in life itself. He stopped shaving his beard, stopped polishing his weapons, and only washed himself when he could no longer endure his own odor. He spent those days angry and sad and alone, weeping bitter tears for what he had lost, what had been taken from him. 2 days before her 17th birthday, Laide Haraya tried to kill herself. She only failed because the Legba 6 subcranial interrogator sitting just above her spinal cord detected both the flood of distress signals coursing through her nervous system and the significant disruption of base electrical activity within her cerebral cortex due to hypoxia via the embedded neural dust in her brain. Her rapidly rising heartbeat, the bright lights flashing behind her eyes, and the popping sounds in her head as she slowly slipped away from consciousness, all were inferred from a mathematical model, the probabilistic solutions to which all converged at one solution: 1 minute and 53 seconds until death, plus or minus 20 seconds. The exception triggered Legba 6 to send a priority 1 alert through the distributed data space of the city, an electronic cry for help issued at the speed of light. It instantly repurposed the nearest available android programmed with a medical subroutine, MedDroid LG114, which had been assisting Mama Peju, Laide's elderly neighbor, through her stroke recovery for 6 weeks. The instant its quantum processors were seized by Legba 6 active control, LG114 stopped feeding Mama Peju. The droid dropped the spoon halfway between the bowl and Mama Peju's open mouth and spun around, leaving a mess on the floor. It ran right through the solid white graphene wall, separating her assigned living unit from the one Laide shared with her parents. The action was so unexpected it left the old woman shocked and slack-jawed, with unswallowed pap dribbling down the sides of her mouth. LG114 reached Laide just as her muscles stopped twitching and went slack. With smooth, geometrically precise motions of its articulated limbs, using a scalpel extruded through the smooth silicon surface of one of its fingers, LG114 cut the faded green and yellow Ankara cloth she had rolled and tied into a crude noose. The android pulled Laide down, braced her head and neck, allowing normal blood flow to resume to her brain. It calculated the time it would take to get her down the elevators and through the connecting tunnels to the only medical center in Isale, the migrant section of the city. The result was beyond the margin for acceptable risk without immediate endotracheal intubation. LG116 engaged its emergency flight protocol. There were no windows wide enough to fit an adult-sized human body, and so it expanded the one in the wall, tearing the frame and the graphene walls away with little effort, before activating the jets and taking to the skies along an optimized trajectory, a perfect parabolic arc, with Laide nestled in its arms like a sleeping child. LG114 returned to Mama Peju's side exactly 4 minutes and 20 seconds after it had left, having effortlessly inserted itself between Laide and the death she desired. The droid had only suffered superficial damage, scrapes and tears in its synthetic silicone flesh from the jagged edges of the wall breaks, and a hole in its back, where the emergency jets had burned through, exposing the metal chassis beneath. LG-114 cleaned up the mess it had made in its haste, helped Mama Peju finish her food and get into her bed, and then auto-scheduled itself for repairs in 4 hours at the level 1 maintenance hub, where, giving the timing, it would also receive its daily software update.
The crowd goes wild. That's a great start. Telling you. And you know what I was thinking? I was thinking it's kind of like cyberpunk. Would you
It
call
is.
it? Okay, I was looking for it and I was thinking about it while you was reading. And I was like, that's the word I was looking for. It's very cyberpunky. Yeah, I was
It's,
wondering. I was
it's
like, there was something I was like really liked about it. I was like, what is it? I couldn't put my finger on it, but yeah.
Oh yeah, it has a lot of the cyberpunk hallmarks, some individual up against a large corporation or
Mhm.
government or society using kind of like homemade network rough technology that they've
Yeah.
cooked up with,
Kind of
someone they just
hackery.
met, kind of hacking through the system to break
Mhm.
free. Yeah, that it has those cyberpunk elements. So it also has a bit of, dystopian set in a dystopian
Yeah.
city, but also has cli-fi elements to it as well regarding how they end up in this city.
Yeah.
So yeah, it has a bunch of genre elements. I like to mix things up.
That's right. It's working. Okay, before I ask you some questions about editing and writing, what would you want people to get from this collection?
Um, I I think mostly I want people to think about the way technology intersects with our lives a lot more. I find, for example, many of us are not really actively aware of how much technology influences us, affects our thoughts, our behaviors. For a lot of people I've met, technology is just this inevitable thing that is being developed somewhere by people they don't know, but they will just accept. And the key thing I try to point out with a lot of these stories is the development of technology is not inevitable. It's the result of a choice. Somebody somewhere has made certain assumptions, they have certain objectives, they have certain worldviews that they want to implement, and that is what drives the development of the technology. And that will eventually affect all of our lives, right? One of the things my dad likes to say, or liked to say when he was still with us, was the history of humanity is largely the history of technology. But the thing I will add to that is the history of technology is largely the history of philosophy. The technology is built depending on the dominant philosophy at the time. Um, you know, Classic example, gunpowder existed in East Asia, especially in China for a long time, but because they were pursuing an isolationist kind of regional approach at the time where they just want to stay in their home and maintain order there, they largely used it just for fireworks. But the minute gunpowder got out into another group of people that had a different philosophy that was more empire building, then it was weapons, right? So the same fundamental concept, but different worldviews can completely change the way we react and respond to technology. And I feel like in all these stories, I try to show the impact of technology from different viewpoints. I talked about Lide and her search for purpose and meaning. I also have a story. The opening story in the collection is from the point of view of someone investigating an AI and how the AI itself is trying to figure out its own purpose. And the last story in the collection kind of shows emerging. It's set in an alternate future, an emerging of traditional African philosophies about ancestral belief as well as technology. And I just try to show the impact of technologies from different angles in our worldview. There are a few stories in the collection that are not sci-fi. There's, I think, two stories that are, or maybe three, that are more fantasy than sci-fi, but I feel like thematically they touch on the same thing, which is we have a choice in how we engage with the world, whether it is thinking about the impact of technology, the development of technology, it will be driven by our worldview and the way we view others and our community. And I want people to read the stories and think about all of these different ways that we can help build our future.
Okay, you heard it here. Alrighty. So my next question is, what would you say is the two best things about the process of being a writer? And then after that, it's the two worst things, or maybe the two things that are favorable about being a writer. And I guess you had a journey. Yeah, you've gone from short to published, and you have a novel and a collection. Yeah. So
Yeah.
yeah, any any wise words that you want
I
to
think,
impart on us?
okay. For me, the best thing is still just coming up with ideas, with thinking. Like for me, I feel like the main reason I write is it's a way for me to process different things that I'm thinking about, right? Um, it's that was the reason I started writing in the first place as a young kid, and it's the reason I still do it. Because when I sit down, I think a lot of thoughts, right? Lots of stuff comes into my mind, different ideas. I see things, I listen to other people, I read other books, and all of these things are synthesizing in my brain. But very often, it is not until I sit down and try to articulate those thoughts, my own thoughts that are coming into words and writing them down, that it fully makes sense to me. So for me, writing is in large part kind of discovering myself and understanding things in my own mind. And I still love that process of getting an idea and exploring it fully, doing all the research, even the drafting and trying to figure things out. And you write a paragraph and you realize this doesn't make sense, or that's not really what you're thinking. Then you go back and like, okay, how can I say this more clearly? I really enjoy that process of figuring it out. And I guess the second thing I love about writing is I actually really love talking to people about stories as well, because I learn stuff like just this conversation we've had. I picked up so many things. I picked up a James Baldwin quote. I picked up different ideas. I'm thinking about community and things like that. So I love coming up with the ideas, engaging with them, talking to other people about stories as well. And I don't think that will ever go away. Like no matter what I keep doing, I think I will still love that aspect of writing. The things I don't like, I guess I will say it takes time. Writing takes time. And I think a lot of people, at least a lot of people I've met, younger writers I've met, don't appreciate how much time and effort it takes to actually articulate your own thoughts, construct a narrative around those thoughts, and then edit it into a way that it will be entertaining or engaging or insightful to someone else. That just takes time, and there's kind of no shortcut around it. So that part, it can be painful, right? When you're on draft 15 and you're still trying to figure stuff out. At that point, it can be that part I don't love, but the process of figuring out I do. And then I guess the thing I don't love so much about writing is kind of the capitalistic enterprise around it. Because at the end of the day, writing, if you're writing professionally or semi-professionally, to get paid, which many of us are because, that's the way the world is constructed. But that means there is this need to constantly market yourself, right? And that has nothing to do with writing. That has everything to do with being seen, being visible, being in the right places, talking to the right people. Some of it is luck. Some of it is getting publishers to come on your side, getting them to allocate a budget to your work, which is, it's all things that are outside of writing and it's all industry. And I don't love that part, but I kind of see it as a necessary evil, because at the end of the day, if none of that is done, then you don't get enough readers to actually engage with the work. And you don't get opportunities like this to talk with people like you about the work and the stories, to get more ideas and to keep writing, because we all need to eat at the end of the day. Everybody, especially for people who this is their primary source of income, that aspect of it whether they love it or not, you still need to do it. I don't love it. Luckily, I have a job, but like a main day job that helps support me. But yeah, that part of writing and the writing industry, I would say, I don't love.
Okay, that's real. I think those are real answers. I feel like everyone's that has the whole struggle of like just getting paid. Like I just want to write. It's like I feel like I hear that a lot. And like also just people paying you like a certain, the pro rate, market rate, and things of that nature as well. And I've recently seen on Twitter they're talking about like what an advance really is. It's not really like what you think it is or what they said it was before. Like you get a whole bunch of money up front, et cetera, et cetera. And everyone has a different contract and la. So yeah, I can see that art to be frustrating. But like you said, it's like, well, yeah, do we want to do this or not? Like if you're gonna do it, then you're gonna have to go through this hell over here. Okay. And so I'm gonna mention that you also edit. And so yeah, I'm gonna be talking about a little bit. Do you have a preference over editing and writing, or like which one do you enjoy more, or like what do you like about maybe either one of them? How do you want to explore that? I just always
To be
interested
honest,
in people who write and edit. Like, is it like not a left brain, right brain thing, but is it like a completely different mode, or do you have a different goal when you're writing or editing, or stuff like that?
okay, so there's kind of two questions, right? The first part is which do I prefer? Honestly, I don't know. I keep going back and forth. There was a point not that long ago where I actually wanted to stop writing completely and just be a full-time editor, like just edit work. And now I've gone the other way and I'm like, no, I just want to write and do less editing. So it keeps shifting. If you ask me in 3 years' time, I'll probably have a different answer for you. And that's probably because I really enjoy doing both. And I enjoy them for different reasons. But in a sense, it's kind of fundamentally the same thing, which is I mentioned I love the process of figuring out what I am thinking and what the best way of expressing those thoughts are, constructing a narrative with it. And that's what I do with my writing. But when I'm editing, it's the same thing, but in reverse. I'm trying to figure out what someone else is trying to say and helping them say it the best way possible. And I really enjoy that process as well because you're starting at a different point. They give you a draft and say, here's what I wrote. What do you think? How can I construct it? And the first question is always, what are you really trying to say? Right. And for me, I really enjoy that part as an editor because I feel like a lot of editors have a different approach where in their head it's like, how can I take what you've written and arrange it into something I would like? But my starting point is usually very different. It's like, no, what are you trying to say? What is the best version of this story in your head? And then I'll try to help you get there. And a lot of the time when I edit, it's very hands-on. Sometimes it's almost like I co-write the story with people, like almost everyone I've edited with. I tend to go back and forth with them a lot. I ask them a lot of questions because I'm trying to figure out what they are trying to say. So a lot of my editing style is asking lots of questions. Depending on the questions, I might even take a paragraph and rewrite it for you and say, okay, is this closer to what you were thinking? Because that part you wrote is contradicting what you say you're trying to do. And then we go back and forth. So I enjoy that process as well. To me, it's not that different in style. There's not like a different part of my head for editing and a different part for writing. It's kind of the same. I'm still asking the same central question, which is, what are you really trying to say? And it's just, am I asking myself or am I asking someone else?
I think that's real. That's a good way to look at it too. And I didn't really think about it like that, asking myself and asking someone else what you're trying to say. I think that's a good sort of like flip to it. It's
I
been
think
interesting too, from editing and
uh,
writing. Hmm?
sorry, I was just going to add to that. That's probably why I haven't edited that many projects because it tends to be a big thing, right? For a lot of
Labor
for
intensive.
some, yeah, for some editors I know, they the editing process is more just a selecting process, right? Several people send stories to you, and you select the ones that work for the project you have in mind. I haven't really done that. All of the projects I've edited have been either by invitation only, or I have worked directly with the authors to craft the narrative that ends up in the book. So it's a more labor intensive aspect, which is because it's closer to my writing style, than say just, oh, do I think this story works? Yes, select it. If not, no. So yeah, that's probably another difference.
Okay. Yeah, I think one of the things when I think of editing, I was thinking like, how can I help elevate the story from what I think the person is trying to say? This is what I think you're trying to say. And like someone that's done that with me before, it was like, this is a way that you can say this because the way you're saying this right now is like kind of, sort of, but not really. And I think sometimes we need to like see that. And I don't really feel like that's like making it, not that person's style, but it's just like, how can we rearrange these with the economy of words we have here? How can we switch these around here and see what is that evoking and what is that doing? So I think that's like you saying about that. I think that's pretty interesting too. And like when I've done my first like editing thing, I was like this is tiring. I was like, oh, more now. I was like I
Yeah,
was like to like pull my hair out. I was just like, and, you
it's
get
exhausting.
some folks are like, this is like the story I want to tell. Like, I got to tell this story. Blah, 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 blah. Some folks are like, yeah, I love these edits. This was amazing. It was some that was like, I didn't even have to do anything. It was like, it jumped out the slush pile. I was just like, wow. Others, it was like, let's try this, let's do that. It was like, I'm down. And so it's just very interesting getting a wide variety of different people to work with, but trying to still maintain that same level throughout, I think is very interesting. But yeah, I've been finding that like I like the whole creation process of editing too, like of putting things together. So cool. Next question is, can you talk a bit about representation and what that means for you as an author and an editor in this field?
Yeah, I think, I mean, it's a bit cliche to say representation matters because everybody says that, but it's true, and it's true on a more fundamental level than I think many people realize, right? It's one thing to know within yourself that you are capable of something. It's another thing entirely to see it done, right? And to see people like you doing it and doing it well. It almost gives you, it's that, human psychology thing that we talked about. There's something that unlocks in your mind when you see, someone that looks like me, that's from the same place as me, or has had similar life experience as me, and can do this thing that I also think I could do, but I wasn't sure, right? Or I had never seen anyone like me do it before. And just having that representation, having people like that exist, it reduces the barrier to entry in so many places, not just in writing, even in like boardrooms, in tech companies. Like I work for a technology company, and sometimes I just see like, oh, there's someone from Nigeria that's VP of something in Houston. And I'm like, okay, that's somewhere I could get. Because if you grow up only seeing CEOs or writers that look a certain way, no matter how much self-confidence you have, there will always be that little bit of doubt, right? Like, oh, but maybe this is not for me because no one that looks like me has ever done this. I've never seen them. In a way, it kind of reminds me of, there's a classic science fiction story. I cannot remember the title anymore. I think it's basically about, it's from the 70s. And it's about this group of Russian scientists where the government basically tells them that someone else, a scientist somewhere else, has invented a telepathy machine, and they need to be able to replicate it because if it's the middle of the Cold War, right? If the Americans have done it or someone else has done it, they need to be able to do it. If not, they'll fall behind. And the first thing they say is, but telepathy is impossible. And the government says, well, this guy did it, and we have from our espionage, we have just a little bit of some of his notes and whatever. And they give those notes to the scientists and they say, figure out how he did it because it's possible. We know he did it. And this is all the information we have. And so these scientists, they try their best and they try. And eventually they come up with a telepathy machine. And the end of the story kind of reveals that it was all fake. No one had invented telepathy before. Those notes were just made up. And the entire point was to get them past the idea that it was impossible, because as long as they thought it was impossible, they would never do it. And I feel like representation in some ways is someone like giving you that information to say, no, someone has done it. You can do it. And so seeing people like N.K. Jemisin, like Nnedi Okorafor, like Tade Thompson, like Stephen Barnes, just existing, writing the kind of science fiction that I dream about, the kind of ideas that I think about, and I was sketching, in my teens, 20s. It helps just convince me that no, I can do this. And I would love to be able to do that for the next generation as well. Just by existing, giving them that permission, like in that story, to say, no, someone has done it before. The person looks like you, just from the same place, same kind of life experience, and it is possible and you can do it. So go ahead and don't even doubt yourself.
That's real. I think it's complicated, but I think, yeah, a part of what I think is valuable or useful with representation is that it it provides like a roadmap. And not that it's the same way that it's going to happen for them, but it gives like a variable, a possibility of that coming into play. And I do find that I think that helpful because like it allows like again you to start imagining or the audience to start imagining it or contend with like the possibility of imagining these things. Which is like contending against like epistemology, like usually Western epistemology, because these people usually don't enter these spaces under normal quote unquote circumstances. So yeah, I think it has a utility. I also think it's very interesting sometimes too how it can be utilized in ways that I feel like as you mentioned before with the capital, it seems to be going in a circle or going nowhere fast around. I don't know, more like identity politics are interesting in terms of like when you add money into it because it's not just like this is my ontology. It's like this is my ontology, and I'm trying to make 7 figures from it. Like, just in case you haven't noticed here. And yeah, so no, I thought that was great, and I thought it was interesting how you said like it like trying to overcome the impossible. I think I've been very interested in thinking about like what's possible within the impossible and like and then clarifying those terms about like I think maybe like yeah what's actual, like what are we doing here, and I don't know really what that, I guess that looks like, but I feel like sometimes it's like we have a overt focus on like the ways in which we can live or that we may live, but I think sometimes like just looking into like how we may die or the way that death sort of affects the way that we live, sort of like it clarifies it a bit. It's like, okay, this is a little bit clearer because it's like it's not just what we want or what could be, it's the actuality of that kind of contending with it. And I always find those super interesting. I feel like you played with that a lot with the suicide thing at the beginning. It's like, it's like I don't necessarily want to live. And like, what does that mean? Am I not worthy? Should my story end there? La. So yeah. I thought that was great. Let's see here. And this is what I forgot the audience may not know. I'm talking about Gonker from the novella Convergence Problems. It's like actually we moved on a little bit, but that was just a reference. I mean, I still have it up right here on my iPad, so I'm looking at it. Yeah, so my next question is, can you tell us what we can expect from you in the future, near or far?
Yeah, I'm working on several things, but
Oh,
to the next thing that should be out and available for people to read is a short story from me. This one is more historical historical horror, let's call it that way. It's a story called Unquiet on the Eastern Front, which will be published by Subterranean Press later this year, I believe in September. And it's kind of set in East Africa during World War II. It features a mythological monster from East Africa, but it's also based a lot on real history of the battles, because people forget that World War II was an actual world war and people were fighting everywhere on behalf of the British, of course. But still, it kind of follows this British officer kind of trying to engage with his own family's history of colonization, of what they're doing in Africa, sense of belonging there, while contending with the Italian forces that are trying to take control of East Africa, and also this monster that is lurking. So it's an interesting story, let's put it that way. I hope people will read it and engage with it, because it's one of those that I feel it touches on aspects of history that are a bit less known. It's also just a really weird, trippy horror story as well. And then I also have another short story coming out in, I believe this should be November. So this one's a science fiction story. One of my favorite things I've written, actually. And it is a sequel to the first story in Convergence Problems. So if you've read Convergence Problems, the first story is called Debut, and it's about AI and art. And the story that's coming out later this year is called Encore. And that takes place 3 million years in the future and is also about AI and art. But I go way, way, way out there with it. And it features, cosmic physics, DNA computers, some really, really trippy, fascinating stuff, black hole physics, sentient planets. So if you want a wild cosmic space adventure, mostly based on real physics, but I'm taking a lot of liberties with it as well. That should be out in November. It will be in an anthology called Deep Dream from MIT Press. It features other stories from other science fiction authors as well. Some of the best in the game. So I'm really proud of that story, and I'm happy it's in that anthology, which is being edited by Indra Pramit Das, who I also love as well. So yeah, those are the two things I have coming out next. Hope people pick them up. I also just finished writing a novella, which is set in a world called the Southieverse. And the Southieverse, for those who don't know, is an African-inspired science fantasy secondary world, but it's also a shared world, which means anybody of African descent on the continent or in the diaspora, African American, Caribbean, Southern, everywhere, can write in this world as long as they get permission from the collective, right? And the whole idea behind the Southieverse is there's 12 of us that are founding members of the collective that helped create this world, flesh out the ideas. There's 5 separate planets, there's a whole system, there's a whole history. And we would just love for other African and African diaspora writers to jump in and, use this world as a playground to tell their own stories that are as abstracted as they want or as grounded as they want. So I just wrote a novella set in the Southieverse. Other members of the Southie collective are writing stories. I can tell you that there's another Southie anthology in the works, and we have a lot of authors from the US, the Caribbean, all over Africa, from the UK, everywhere, just writing stories in the Southieverse. So I'm really excited about that. And I'm excited to see where the novella ends up. Probably not in the anthology that's coming, but somewhere else. And at the same time, I'm working on my second novel, which I can't say too much about just yet, but I'm hoping to have that done relatively soon. So yeah, quite busy, a bunch of stuff happening, but all good. And I'm enjoying all of it. So it's good fun.
Yeah, it's good stuff. I'm excited for you. Okay, well, this is basically the last question I got for you. is, when we bring you back, when the second novel comes out, and, what would you want to say to yourself now? So, like, when I bring you back in the future, I'm going to play this clip, and then we're going to see how you feel about it. So, you're talking in the future, to you, yourself, after the second album already came out. Yeah, what do you got to say to yourself?
Okay, well, first thing I would say to myself is, well done. You finished writing the story that has been in your head for, I don't know, a decade or more now. You actually got it down on paper, figured out the shape of it, and now it's a real published book. Great job. I hope you're enjoying everything that comes with that, enjoying seeing the book, enjoying talking to other people about the book. And now I want to challenge you to write something even more bold and different and interesting compared to everything you've done before. I want you to challenge yourself to do something that you think is more difficult and more complex and more important. And I hope you'll be able to take that challenge and in writing that next book, learn something new about yourself. So, yeah, keep challenging yourself and keep dreaming big, always bigger, always.
Here it is. I'm excited to see what you think when it comes out. I'm
Yeah.
like, well, I tried to mix it up a bit because it's always like, what would you tell your teenage self? And it's like, I feel like everyone's already did that one. So it's like, what do you tell yourself in a few years, maybe, hopefully, that what it's like, what's happening. So I'm super excited to eventually have you back on and to talk about the new text and also the other great things that you're doing. And I'm gonna try to put links to everything that we talked about in the YouTube bio for everyone, just so people can have access to that. But you can buy all their work wherever you buy your local books at, or I won't tell you where to go. I know that's political now. But yeah, thanks for coming on here and talking with us. You also agree Wale's work in Fiyah as well, plus other people who are part of the Salty verse and as well as too. I'm really excited that it's expanding. We're having more and more opportunities for writers to come together and sort of um, produce work. I think when I was like looking for work in like 2000s and like 2010s, I had trouble really finding like collections of science fiction or speculative work. And so I'm super excited that we have more variety, being able to get out there and taking like multiple routes too, not just like the big publisher routes. But yeah, thanks again for coming. This has been amazing. I'm again so grateful that you took the time out to talk with us, and just again, I want to celebrate Fiyah and just like you and your work and just like participating with us and everything. It's just again super. Just I don't know. It's just like it takes all of us to make it work, and I don't know. Sometimes it doesn't even seem like it, but then we take a step back. I was just like, oh, we really had some people who've like come here and like published and like gone on and do great things and are part of a larger system. So I just want I don't know, I guess maybe some way for folks who I don't know, maybe don't read as much or maybe could be into more reading or looking for folks who are talking about this, that we could have a sort of ecosystem to direct them not only to Fiyah but also to these other people works and such like that. So again, thank you so much for chatting with me.
Thank you. And I hope I get to get another story in Fiyah one of these days. I need
Oh
to
yeah, I'm sure.
yeah, when I take a break from the novels and novellas, I should do a quick short story and send it into Fiyah because can't forget the roots.
Yeah, and that's been honestly. So sometimes it's like it is like, oh, you get your first story, and then people go on and like take off. But it's always nice when folks come back and it's like, this is still a part of like the work that I'm putting down. And again, I'm hoping that we can keep having maybe like a sister mag that can focus maybe on the more weirder, odder stuff, and that could be a flagship or just really expanding around like the types of like fiction and poetry that can be put out there by Black authors. I feel like Fiyah is like one of the places that accepts for almost every Black person, all kinds of Black people. And so, what does it look like having more of those and that be like available and like known that it's there too? So I think this is a good start. I think Fiyah is almost 10 years, and so it's always been going on way longer than we've started doing it. And even before, let's say the 1920s and such. So what does it look like for us to keep pushing forward? And I'm excited for, everything you got going on and everything that all of our little like larger community is doing. So many exciting things I think happening here that even amongst like all the I don't want to say crazy, all the wildness of the publishing industry. I feel like it's still nice to see some good things like happening and things still moving along. So yeah, again, thank you so much. Any last words?
No, I was just going to say thank you, and thank you to everybody that listens to this. I hope you enjoyed it whenever you listen to it in the recording or wherever. And yeah, whenever you get to read the book, if you do get to read the book, I hope you enjoy it. That's it.
Alrighty. Thanks so much.
Okay.